everybody. Welcome back to Wonder Woman Says. We want to review two more comics for you. Hope you're having a good night wherever you are watching this. I'm ready to get into it. I hope you're ready to see it. Let's do this. Now, over the course of last week, it seems Marvel took it upon themselves to put out this interesting looking one shot involving Mary Jane and the Black Cat. I know when I first heard about it, I knew I was going to read this book. It really looked interesting. I read the plot synopsis for it. I really like where it was heading. Matter of fact, I have it right here. This is the book in question. We're going to talk about what happened in it. So the story goes, one of Peter Parker's villains comes to him while he's in the hospital. He's still banged up from a battle he had recently. I can't really comment on the battle because I haven't been keeping up with Spider-Man comics as of late, but from the opening page of this, it tells a little bit of what happened to him. It sounds like it was a real devastating battle too. He's in the hospital. He's pretty much down and out, can't do much. Mary Jane and of course the Black Cat are pretty much tasked with making sure he actually recovers before he gets back out there to his Spider-Man duties. Well, a villain arrives one night just as Mary Jane and Black Cat are coming to visit him, and pretty much he tries to make a deal with them. He wants his hood back, his hood that gives him his magical powers, or else he's pretty much going to kill Peter Parker, and he wants it brought back before sundown, and it's in the middle of the night, so Mary Jane and Black Cat have a very limited time frame to get this hood and pretty much protect Peter Parker and save his life.
Is that sundown or sunrise?
Sun, sunrise, sun up, sun up. I don't know where my mind was when I said that. Yeah, sun up. Thank you for that.
It's what I do.
Yeah. Anyway, I like how they pretty much gave this little synopsis on the first page of it all. I like that a lot. That's a nice touch. Pretty much, we see the Black Cat incognito coming to visit Peter and check up on him. Of course, this is when we see the main villain of the whole story. He's pretty much making threats on Peter's life, and of course, under normal circumstances, Peter would probably just get up and, pretty much tackle him or something like that, put him in some kind of web, and that pretty much be the whole story right there. But that's just not going to happen this time, obviously. So they end up having to go on this wild mission that'll pretty much take them all night. I gotta admit, it might not seem like much, but this story's gonna take some interesting turns. So here we are. We at this, I guess you could say, little drive-through type of theater. One of the people who hold the key to getting his hood back, the Black Cat, come and try to persuade him to help her and Mary Jane. He pretty much, of course, wants a whole lot of money that neither of them have, so they pretty much end up having to get the money until, of course, the villain recognizes Mary Jane. Pretty much Mary Jane is an actress now in the comics, is fairly well known. He's obviously starstruck. And then once he start asking her about a favorite actor of his, he pretty much becomes all too happy to help him all of a sudden. Anyway, they end up going on some wild adventures all throughout the night. And of course, as we see, they get into some mischief and all that kind of stuff. And this part coming up, probably my favorite part of the whole story. They pretty much end up confronting the Tombstone. But like the story takes an interesting turn. Of course, as we start to see the Black Cat starts talking Mary Jane into dressing up like her to go get what's needed, to go get what they need to get from the tombstone. I think all this right here is really cool. Keep in mind, this is all Mary Jane. This ain't Felicia. It's interesting too, like when they first started out, Black Cat didn't think Mary Jane had what it took to roll with her, but of course as the night wears on, they start to discover they actually work pretty well together. Anyway, they end up getting what they need for this person that's called the Hood. Turns out this thing right here is some kind of monster. Of course, as all this is going on, coming this page, there's only 15 minutes to sunrise. So they're pretty much running out of time. They gotta go get this thing back to them. Honestly, since this is a one shot, I know I normally tell what happens at the end of comics, but since there ain't gonna be no more parts to this, I figure I'm not gonna tell what happens at the end. Well, at least I'm not gonna tell exactly how the end unfolds, but I will say I think this is a very good one shot. I really like how they came up with the story. I will admit, on paper it doesn't seem like much of a story, but they made it work. And I think for that I gotta give them a lot of credit too.
So out of 10, what would you?
I think I'll give it a 9. I really liked it. The artwork is really beautiful. I think the Black Cat is really cool in this book as is Mary Jane. I really like how they managed to do a story like this without making Peter Parker dominate the whole thing. Even though Peter Parker, he's still a core part of it because they're doing all this stuff because they gotta save his life, but they're actually able to kind of put him on the sidelines for once and actually let the other characters actually take control of the story. Of course, there's no Spider-Man in this story at all, so that's another plus I gotta give them. They made this whole thing work without having a single Spider-Man appearance, whether in flashback or otherwise. I think they did a great job. I really liked it. I recommend any Spider-Man fan or any fan of the Black Cat or Mary Jane to go and definitely get this book. And as a matter of fact, I have an interesting comment to make about this. I had to go to 2 different stores to get this book because there's a comic book store just up the street from where we're shooting this right now. They actually sold out of this book. I couldn't believe it. Because I went to go try to pick it up Friday. They didn't even have no more copies of that book. I had to go all the way across town to another comic book store. That's when I finally found it. I don't regret the trouble that I had to go through to get it. I recommend you get that book and I know you'll enjoy it. Definitely good read.
Alright, so let's talk about Superman fighting the Yellow Perry.
Yeah, let's do that. Well, of course, as you getting used to now, we're doing this little segment called Blast from the Past where we review old school comic books of yesteryear. And well, I guess we have one of those books for you tonight. I bet you nobody in the world really remembers this issue like talking about it, but well, taking you back to 1984 tonight. Issue number 559, Action Comics. I'll tell you this kind of has one thing in common with the comic book I just reviewed on, like, it has a story that on paper doesn't really seem like much of a story at all. doesn't really seem like there's, much stake at all, because you get used to seeing these people fight all these aliens and stuff and fighting all these people like Thanos and all these people like Darkseid and all that kind of stuff. It almost seems a little underwhelming when you see them fight like, little no-name villains that don't have much superpowers, anything like that. But, well, so the story goes in this book, like a comet pretty much comes crashing down. Because a comet comes crashing down this house where this couple lives, and turns out there's a lot more than meets the eye in this comet. That's when the whole story starts. That's when the Yellow Perry starts getting introduced into the story. Well, Clark Kent and Lana Lang, meanwhile, are being talked about on a rival network that enrages their boss. Of course, they don't see anything wrong with it because they think it might equal ratings. Well, turns out Loretta's husband has a plan to make use of her powers that she gains from being the Yellow Perry, because he's going to try to use her powers to help get him some money. Superman starts to become aware too of what's going on, so he starts pretty much trying to keep an eye on him. Turns out Loretta and her husband start coming on to this scheme where they go around, I guess, cleaning up disasters, and they ended up charging the townspeople to pay for it, and they start collecting a lot of money from it too. Of course, this doesn't please Superman at all, and it turns out as the Yellow Perry does all the cleaning up, pretty much the pollution starts getting put in other towns nearby. Superman pretty much ends up cleaning that up. Must admit, of course, for a Superman story, there's not really much going on in this one. But we gotta keep in mind it's from 1984. Well, turns out Superman finally confronts them. Even though he knows what they're doing isn't illegal, he starts telling them how he objects to what they're doing. Of course, Loretta starts having some second thoughts about what they're doing, but her husband, of course, objects to her second thoughts because he's greedy. And, he wants to get rich from this stuff. So it turns out Superman gets kind of suckered into a trap, because the husband starts to act like the Yellow Perry's out of control. But yet, all this turned out to be was a ruse. Get the Yellow Perry to put some kind of spell on Superman. Get the hands of fate, quote unquote, to grab him. Of course, this is Superman we're talking about, so that don't really last too long. Of course, Superman ends up breaking free. And I will admit this is a surprise because this is the end of the story. Superman, I thought, was gonna end up taking the book away from her. But in a surprising twist, he allows her to keep it despite all the things that's been going on. That's pretty much the end of the story, but that ain't the end of the book. However, there's another Superman story in here. This is back from the times where Action Comics used to have more than one story in it. Now, this next story coming up, pretty offbeat. Clark Kent calls himself going with
Jimmy Olsen?
Yeah, Jimmy Olsen to the barber shop, and Jimmy Olsen getting ready to go get a haircut. But then the barber asks Clark if he wants a haircut too. He says yeah. Then they start telling this flashback of a little story. Superman goes to this strange planet. He ends up confronting this beast. This beast ends up attacking him. He pretty much attacks without provocation. He pretty much gives Superman a battle he didn't plan on fighting. Well, there's a twist to that story. He starts to investigate the reason why the beast wants to attack him so bad. Turns out the beast doesn't recognize his hair color because his hair color is black, but he ends up dyeing his hair a different color. That ends up making the beast want to leave him alone all of a sudden. He ends up being able to escape off the planet. Then we come to find out when he dyed his hair, that kind of made his hair lose the invincibility it had. That explains why he was able to get that hair cut all of a sudden. Pretty much that's the end of that story. It's a very offbeat tale, but I guess they needed something to fill for that month.
Now, what I want to know is his hair not being invulnerable still canon post-Crisis?
You know, I never really thought about that. You don't really think about Superman's hair when you think about Superman.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, it is a good question right there. I don't think we'll ever know either.
So, out of 5, what would you say that one?
I thought you say out of 10.
Well, the first one was out of 10. You know, out of 10, out of 5, doesn't matter. Fractions. They're weird.
I'll admit this wasn't really a particularly strong issue of Action Comics because there wasn't much of a villain in either story, and the whole story just seemed kind of inconsequential, and the whole story just seemed like something you wouldn't particularly remember after you read it, which I think is a shame because I think placed in the right situation, I think the Yellow Perry can be a somewhat interesting villain. She has a cool look to her, but it just, when she is in the comics, they don't tend to really make good usage of her.
Wait, she comes back?
Yeah, I think she come back a couple more times. I think she just disappears after that.
All right. But, so numerically, because people are going to ask.
I think I'll probably give this one maybe a 6 out of 10. I've read much better issues of Superman than that before.
Okay, so 6 out of 10, that's a 3 out of 5.
Yeah.
Fractions.
Yeah, I just think it's just, way better Superman stories out there than that. I mean, it's not the worst you can read, but it's nothing I would be in a hurry to read again, that's for sure. Also, I even think it's even better stories than that, even from the same time period. I know this is pre-Crisis Superman, and therefore the stories weren't quite as, how should I say, the stories weren't trying to be all like epic every single month like later on. This is back when they used to give Superman small time stories. Because as a matter of fact, I could definitely see this book right here being an episode of maybe an older Superman animated series. I think if you collect Superman comics, I think it's worth getting into those circumstances because, let's face it, that book ain't really going for much of nothing, and if you're trying to build your Superman collection, you're most likely finding it at the comic book store, in the dollar bin or something like that. I think it's the kind of comic book you read once and then you just kind of put it away.
I gotta say, though, the fact that she's called the Yellow Perry Every time I look at that cover, I keep thinking it's a typo.
Yeah, I can sympathize with that. It is a pretty interesting name for a villain. I will say it's a shame they kind of made her fell by the wayside after Crisis. I think she might have appeared one or two more times in the 90s or 2000s or something like that. And then she just pretty much vanished. They did another character like that too. They did Knockout like that. They had introduced her later on, like a decade later, and then she just disappeared out of nowhere too.
All right, so final thoughts.
Well, it's pretty obvious I like the Mary Jane book a lot more than the Superman book I just reviewed. I do know I'm planning on coming to this Comic-Con in about a week or two from now, the Big Lick Comic-Con. I think it's going to be up in Roanoke. I'm only going to be there for the Saturday part of it. My fiance's coming too. Actually, my fiance is going to drive me up there. We're going to have a little trip. It'll be real fun. I say, it's been a pleasure doing this show so far. I know, I'll admit, I'm not quite a professional doing this, but I have faith that I'm going to get a lot better doing this, and I'm always up for a challenge, and I have fun doing it. I hope you have fun watching me. I can't wait to come back next week and review some more comic books for you. I hope you have a great evening. It was nice doing this. Enjoy the rest of your night. See you next week.